Hey guys, my dog's inside, so I'm hoping she doesn't see a squirrel. Uh, Things are good. I don't know if all of you have heard, but I smacked turns out it wasn't a calf, it was more like a teenager cow Monday of last week. But things are good. If you've had to deal with insurance companies, you don't have to, at least around America, you'll know that time is not of the essence with them. The last claim I had to deal with, it took me like, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 months to get all hammered out. This time they had me in a rental car in 6 hours, had a check to me 3 days later. And it was, man, just how the whole thing played out. I could just see God was, he had things set up. And like I had said last week, God warned me that some stuff was going to go down, but the way he was talking, it sounded like it was going to go down with other people, and I was just going to be like the pillar of faith for them. 2 days later, I hit a cow. So I read back on what he said, and out of like 4 or 5 paragraphs, one sentence, the very first one, had to do with me having to deal with stuff. But all the same, I knew it was God, and that made it so much easier just to maintain a sense of peace about the whole thing. And the whole day after I smacked that cow, it was early in the morning on my way to work. God just kept really, really reinforcing to just keep that peace, to not let people get me worked up, because God knows plenty of them would. And just, take care of everything on my end, let him work with the people on the other end. And they did. It took me 5 days. I got a new car. Kind of a girly car, but it meets my needs. And that was another thing, too. I was talking to God. I was like, God, help me find the perfect car. And he finally got it across to me that he doesn't really care. He tweaked my perspective, so it's like he just helped me see it in such a way that I was able to just talk to God and be like, hey, help me find a car just that meets my needs. It doesn't have to be a 67 Chevelle. And it certainly was not. But, man, just through that whole thing, there was God really, really got a lot across to me. And that's about it as far as the car wreck thing. Man, that's all said and done now and behind me. Has been for a few days. And if that's not God helping me out, I don't know what is. At least if you've ever had to deal with insurance companies. So, moving on. I really hope a lot of you guys listened to Greg Boyd's broadcast from Sunday, because that was off the hook. I've already listened to it 3 times. And seems to be a trend of this phenomenal pastor up in Dayton, Ohio, I think, Jim Martin. He's been on a tear about end times stuff. And Gary Carpenter has been talking kind of about it. He's been focused more on the contemporary mentality. And then Greg Boyd just kind of picked up the torch and ran with it. And just as he was talking, I could just, everything he was saying, what was coming out of his mouth was going straight into my heart. It's just confirming a lot of things God have been getting across to me. So, if you haven't had a chance to just sit down and watch it, it's worth the 60 minutes. Well worth it. So, I just kind of wanted to put my 2 cents in on that whole thing, too. Not so much about end times, because that's just so ambiguous. I mean, there's so much you could say about it, and so little of it would be actually thoroughly biblically backed up. But what really matters is where we're at with God now. Not as nations or as continents or as governments, just as people, individually. because that's what Jesus boiled it down to, really. I mean, it's our individual relationships with God and how we're able to network with other people who have that same relationship with God. It's simple. But Jesus talked a lot about how all kinds of bad things were going to happen. And, man, I was reading Luke 21, I believe, quite a while ago. And then I got to this point after we'd gotten done talking about the widow's mite and going through all these people were asking about the end times and how we'll know when it comes upon us. And Jesus went on and on and on about how there's going to be wars and rumors of wars and pestilence and famine and earthquakes and all kinds of weird places and just all kinds of bad stuff. But none of that's going to happen until, well, he was talking to his disciples at the time, until they get persecuted and reviled and lifted up in a bad way, not like crowd surfing, like getting lynched. And that's going to be the start, at least from what I get out of it. That's going to be one of the first phases, if you want to say it that way. And honestly, I don't know how many Christians are ready for it. I don't think I am, to be honest. And he, another interesting thing he said was that we'll be taken to synagogues and prisons. Those are the ones that aren't going to like us. So, we got the church and the government. 2 strikes. Good thing God's on our side, huh? But, you know, it's how confident are you that you can hear God? That you're doing what He has asked you to do? That He's the one building you up? There was honestly, I get real fed up with church people that just cater to everybody else's emotions. Like there's this one friend of mine. He used to be real active in churches. The one he went to that was like 100 miles away, and then when he was able to make it to the one here in Tulsa, he loved coming, loved sitting under the teaching, loved getting together with a couple of guys and just talking about God. Then he started getting under the law, started finding a few New Testament verses that, I don't know why you'd want to go back under the law. But he just found a few New Testament verses that basically justified everything in Leviticus, best I could tell. I didn't spend a whole lot of time going through all the crap that he believes now. But, you know, what I love Paul in the New Testament, because he'd tear into somebody if they needed it. Man, I love reading Galatians, because it was talking about Peter and the people he was with. He'd be eating with the Gentiles, and then certain of the Jews came to, it probably says why, but they came over and catch up with Peter, and then Peter separated himself from the Gentiles and started going back under the law. And Paul even says, man, Paul was talking to the Galatians, he's like, dude, I said to Peter before all of them, every single person there, hey, yeah, we're Jews, we've been freed from the law by Jesus. Why on earth would anybody want to go back under it? Man, he tore into Peter, and Peter was like, he was the foremost. He was the CEO of Christianity, if you want to say it that way. And generally, if you go tearing into somebody from HQ, it's frowned on. But Peter was wrong. And Paul had the gumption to stand up to him and put the church back on the right path. So what if Peter was offended by it? If it was truth, it needed to be done. And Paul talks, at least in four of his epistles, about admonishing each other and I looked up the official definition for admonishing. Let me get it here. Didn't know I was going to go in this route. But to reprove or scold, especially in a mild and good-willed manner. To caution, advise, or counsel against something. To urge to a duty or remind. There's more here. Reprove firmly, but not harshly. Yeah. Honest, Sadie. Sorry, the dog sees a squirrel outside. So what if Paul just watched Peter do that and just went back to his tent and started praying for Peter? Just urged us, Sadie, stop whining. Nobody likes a whiner. And just urged people to just start praying for Peter to get back on the right track. I mean, it was obvious that Peter could hear God for himself, but why wasn't he listening to God in that instance? You know, you can come up with all kinds of ideas in your mind, but it's all just speculation. What matters is what Peter did. So sometimes reproof needs to happen, admonishment needs to happen. Same thing with my buddy that's going back under the law, or for some people that just started listening to the prosperity message that all they got to do is give to a church, and then God will give to them. Like the church is doing that much of God's work. You know what's funny is in Proverbs it says, if you give to the poor, you lend to the Lord, and He'll repay. How about that? But, you know, the church is also doing the work of God. The church should be doing the work of God. And that's why they need support too. But, anyway, some friends got into the prosperity gospel. Some other friends got into this extreme grace thing where it's not about accountability anymore. And a lot of friends that are still close to God, that haven't disregarded what it takes to get to know God better, they just keep saying, well, we need to pray for them. Yeah, we do, but we got to have the spine to stand up to them if they need it. It's as simple as that. That's what it's going to come to, especially, you know, if Jesus said we're going to be hated by everybody, whose back are we going to lean up against, if not our brothers? Somebody that's like-minded, that believes the same thing we do, that's just as determined and dedicated as we are about it. Honestly, I don't want to be leaning up against a pillar and then just have all this termite damage in it, just collapses as soon as I put any weight on it. That is bogus. That would suck. So there is a real fine line there, I think. Just like there's a fine line between being judgmental and a gossip and actually caring about somebody. You know how many Christians just get their skivvies in a knot when they find out I go to bars with friends from work? Man, that's the bridge that I use to get to them. It's people that have known God longer than I have, and they get all flustered about it. Why? Is it because they can hear God and they're trying to intercede for me? No, I don't have a problem with alcohol. They just want to be judgmental. We got to be able to hear God well enough on our own to know when we're right and they're wrong, regardless of whether they've known God longer than we've been alive. Or at least in my case. After I listened to Greg's message on Sunday, God started talking to me about, he finished his broadcast, and I was just kind of sitting there. My mind was just going like a million miles an hour. And then God started talking to me about, I don't want to say end time stuff, because then you just start getting weird, but about the way things are going. You can read it in Romans, early part of Romans 1 or 2. how God gave them up. They would rather be selfish and chase after their own lust, satisfy their own emotional desires than chase God. So God had to forfeit them. It's not like he wanted to, but you gotta know when to hold them, you gotta know when to fold them, know when to turn and walk away. Not always what God does. That's just a song that I like. That me and somebody sing at work. But they didn't want anything to do with God. So honestly, God doesn't want to be that weird junior high person that's got a crush on you that just keeps following you around everywhere you go and bothering you and just being a nuisance in general. He's a little bigger than that. So if they don't want anything to do with God, they walked away from him. And honestly, that's the way a lot of culture is going now. It's just all turned emotionally charged, and you can see it. It's just hype, man. And that's one of the reasons that I have lost some friends. I may have been a little passionate in my conveying of the truth to them, and it was still truth, and they didn't like it because it was their emotions. They got all butthurt and offended about what I said, so we quit talking. And when a while back, when I was still kind of learning, in the early parts of learning how to deal with my emotions, God told me just to set them aside. He said, out of everything, my emotions getting in his way the most, of communicating with me, of me just being able to do what he says, that's the biggest hindrance. And it's our own personal obstacles. It ain't my job to deal with your emotions unless you're so far gone that God can't reach you. And even then, I don't like for it to be my job. It's not my job to do that with everybody. There's people within my sphere that he's given me. I'll say it like that. Not everybody. I'm not everybody's babysitter, neither are you. It's not our job to keep everybody in line. But those emotions, man, as far as God's concerned, they're just like a tumor. When they're so focused inward, they degenerate us mentally, physically. I mean, I think it was Solomon that talks about, maybe it was Isaiah, talks about just how stress and fear, how they have an impact on your physical body. Man, and science has proved it time and again. Thank God for science. Keep that stuff funded. But what are we doing with our emotions? They're supposed to be our servant and not our oppressor. We're supposed to be able to just swallow hard and be on the offensive and not have to just cower from our emotions all the time. It's not about that. I was listening to one of these extreme grace guys. He likes to dress real flamboyant. So you know where his money's going, or you know where the church's tithes are going. And he was talking about how when you pray in tongues, you activate the covenant between you and God, which, yeah, but the way he was talking about it, you wait until you start feeling a sore throat or a headache, and that ain't right. You know, I mean, that's where we all start at the beginning, but that's supposed to move us from being on the defensive to being established in God, to having our heels dug in to the point where we don't have to take any of that. We don't deal with those problems because God is our shield. Jesus is our canopy. He's our protector. He's our shield. Man, all we got to do is stay behind him. Imagine this, man. You get some acid rain coming, but you got this somehow acid rain-proof umbrella, but you stick your arm out from under the umbrella, that acid rain's going to get you, and that's how it's going to be with emotions, with anything that the devil's trying to throw at us, man. It's just that important to stay behind Jesus, to stay where he's at, to stay where God's calling us right now at this time. You, me, individually, as a group, God's going to bring people together that can hear him on an individual basis. It's going to be like, he showed me this a few years ago. Like, you know those snipers that have just the whole body camo and they go all out, man. They got weeds like as part of their outfits. They can crawl around. You don't even see them. And he showed me a picture of this globe, and then people from all over the world, like there was people sprouting up here and there like snipers coming out from cover. And then it was just this network God was bringing together, and just more and more and more, like fire spreading. And there's going to be people that want to be a slave to their emotions because that's all they know. There's going to be those. Our church, before I started going to this church, the Family Prayer Center, Dave Roberson Ministries, there was, God told Dave about there was going to be black holes of need that come through the church. There's going to be a wave of them. And obviously, any church, you're going to find them. They just don't want to be healed. They just want to be helped and served. And sure enough, there was a wave, and it took out a lot of people that thought they were doing a good work. But all they were doing, man, was just investing into this black hole that was just taking and taking and taking and taking with no return on investment. Nothing. They didn't want to get closer to God. They just wanted the handout that church people are all too willing to give, which giving is good, but we got to be able to hear God on it. And completely lost my train of thought. So it's just, man, we got to start going on the offensive. We got to put our emotions under our feet. They're supposed to be our servant that just enrich life, that enhance our experiences, not to keep us in fear, man. The devil uses his smoke and mirrors just to manipulate your emotions and make problems bigger than they need to be, bigger than they are. Man, especially when God's working with you, there is no problem. When God tells you to do something, all you got to do is do it. I'm a huge fan of John G. Lake up until he started getting weird towards the end of his life. But it's been a while since I read this story, but God told him to pack up and move to Africa, him and his wife and his litter of kids. I think he had like 8 kids. So he quit his incredibly exorbitantly salaried job as something to do with insurance. Talked to his boss and like, man, I can't do this anymore. God has just called me to do something else. So they packed up, jumped on a ship to South Africa, I think. And as the ship got right up close to South Africa, the people with customs started going to every single person or family or whoever, making sure that they had enough money to get established and that they had a place to stay, because they didn't want people mooching off the government or off the land or off other people, off society. Wouldn't that be nice? Anyway. And dude, John G. Lake and his family didn't have squat. So his wife was kind of leaned up to her husband, and she was like, we don't have anything. What are we going to do? And he's like, man, I don't know. God told us to get on the ship to come here. So they kept watching this customs guy keep coming their way. Sure enough, I don't remember if it was 2 different people or just the same old lady. She was like, hey, God has showed me you and your family in a dream. Here's some keys to my house. And one way or another, whether it was this old lady or somebody else, they got quite a bit of starter money. I forget how much exactly. And there's been a little bit of inflation since then, so I don't want to exaggerate. But they had more than enough to get themselves settled, established, and started in the ministry in a completely new place. And man, God came through for them. I was reading about this legendary intercessor, Reese Howells. He's a Welsh guy, I think. And same kind of thing, man. Bills were due at the end of this day by this time. And somebody came up to him, somebody that knew the situation that was a little close to him, and they're like, how are we going to pay these? And Reese is like, I don't know. Is this what God told us to do? So we're doing it. Sure enough, there was people just sent some money in the mail that day. It works. But we got to deal with our emotions that keep us from stepping out. That's why 2 years ago now, I think, God told me to start a Bible study in our house, but I didn't. I kept psyching myself out. I just kept asking myself, what if this, what if that? I'm not that friendly, I'm not that social. Kept finding excuses not to, and I was dumb enough to keep asking God what he wanted from me. And wouldn't you believe he kept saying the same thing? Bible study, Bible study, Bible study. And I could not bring myself to the point where I could do it. So finally, for whatever reason, the IctusNet Live team asked me if I wanted to start doing one of these where it's just me and a webcam, and I can go do whatever else as soon as I'm done with the broadcast. And I knew God was telling me to start running off at the mouth, but it was basically God was making a concession for me because of the fear that I had at one point. Now, dude, I wish I could do this 5 days a week, to be honest. I feel like an idiot for waiting so long. So, we've all got what it takes to get over our emotions, but it's about dealing with ourselves. It's about giving our innermost a real impartial self-evaluation. That's not always real fun. But when you got God helping you, man, he really highlights a lot of the good things. And most of the time he's pretty nice about the things he wants to get rid of. Unless he's got to tell you 8 or 10 or 12 times. I'm sure everybody's experienced that. Not just me. But I hope I'm not the only one that can see things are not going in favor of Christianity. There's going to be I don't want to say culling, but the emotional ones that just like the fire insurance, the ones that are judgmental, not loving enough, that just don't know God, don't want to get over themselves enough to leave what they've developed for their own life, to chase God. They don't want to abandon their baggage to take what God has for them. Man, there's going to be less and less of them. I remember when I was still living in Washington, man, a long time ago, maybe not that long for everybody, this was like 8 years ago now. I was just sitting in a little coffee shop, and God started talking to me. It was one of those first times, so I was all Twitter-pated, and it's, oh boy. And God told me that the light's going to get lighter and the dark's going to get darker until there's no more gray. And then a few months later, I moved down here to Tulsa, and then there's people saying the same thing. They talk about it in terms of speed. The fast are going to go faster, and the slow are going to go slower. But it was still that gradual differentiation. There's this cluster of Christianity. Fast are going to go faster, slow are going to go somewhere else. And, that's starting to gain some momentum, because Christianity is about accountability. It's about us getting over ourselves, giving ourselves up to God, and letting him mold us and shape us and making us like Jesus, so that we in turn can be an inspiration and example for other people that don't know God, that got burned by God. Well, not by God, by church people. What's more important? Man, there's been so many times God has asked me where my priorities are at. Where's my mind's eye when I'm not reading the Bible, when I'm not deliberately spending time with God? Because that's really the direction that my life is going to go. That's the direction that my soul is going to take me. Man, if God's over here and my soul, my mind's eye is looking that way, I might start walking somewhere in between. I'll split the difference of where God's at and where I'm looking. But wouldn't you know, that still ain't going to get me to God. So, Luke 21, 19, I think. Possess your souls. By your patience, possess your souls. I was reading the Gospels. I was just going through them, reading each one like 5 times or something. And as soon as I came up right on that verse, it's like that was the only verse in the whole page. Man, that just jumped at me. When we think of somebody that's possessed, we think of, maybe that chick from The Exorcist, Linda Blair, I think, or those crazy people that Jesus confronted or that Paul confronted. It's extreme, but it is extremely negative. If we possess our soul, it's extreme, man. We are the ones on the horse and not the ones walking, or on the chariot and not the ones walking, however Solomon said it in Proverbs. But if we're going to possess our souls, there is going to be some fighting involved, and mostly in ourselves. And then, even then, we got to learn the difference between when the devil is just whispering something, trying to plant a thought in our head, and when it's just our own pride. Not that it matters if it's not from God, but when you know it's the devil, that makes it a whole lot easier to deal with. Man, then you can just tell him to piss off and be done with it. I remember when I was living in this little house just south of Tulsa, just a little suburb. And I would just go walking around the neighborhood for 30, 60 minutes, maybe an hour and a half a night, just praying in tongues, and then just having this chat with God in my head. And something happened. I don't know what was going on, but I remember my emotions were getting really, really manipulated. But I wasn't going to stop spending time with God, so I went on this walk, and I made it around 1 block, I think, and then God just kind of opened up my eyes, and there was like this little trio of demons, like Gremlins, if you've ever seen that, that were just screaming stuff, like annoying little demonic parrots. Is what they sounded like. Just all this unrest that my mind could hear, but I didn't know what the source of it was until God told me. So I don't even know if I broke stride in my walk. I just kind of turned my head so like you can catch behind you with your peripheral vision, And I was just like, stop. I pulled a Neo from the Matrix at the end of the first movie. And it was like they just froze. I kept walking, man. I just had peace. It was like still water instead of hurricane gale force winds. So I think it's now is the time to do a lot of prep work. And Jesus talks about that in Luke 19, wouldn't you know it? About how, Paul talks about it too, how we're supposed to be of the day and not of the night, when people just start slacking off and getting drunk and losing their faculties and just they don't have a sense of preparedness or of direction. They just that's when they've mailed it in for the day. They're just winding down, relaxing. That's not what we're supposed to be like overall. Not that we can't have downtime, come on. But Jesus, Paul, throughout the church, God is telling us to be prepared, to be sober-minded, to be vigilant, to be ready. If Jesus is coming like a thief in the night, I'd rather be awake. So that's going to take discipline. Because most of us get tired at night, we're ready to phone it in ourselves. God didn't say we couldn't. God took away all our excuses when he resurrected Jesus. Man, Jesus lived that whole life, no excuses, man. He heard what Jesus heard what God wanted from him. He went and did it. That's it. He didn't come up with excuses. He didn't justify it. He didn't justify staying where he was at. He kept going and kept going, excuse-free. So, what's our excuse? If we legitimately, completely, wholeheartedly want God, we have no excuses. So, I think that's all I got this week. Love you guys, and looking forward to next week. Hope you enjoyed it, and have a good week.